The first thing he noticed was that gravity here had opinions. Not strong ones, but enough to make him feel as if the floor was quietly judging his posture. He tried to straighten, failed, and decided the universe could mind its own business. Around him, the air shimmered with symbols that rearranged themselves every time he focused on them, as if the room were politely refusing to be fully understood. He opened his mouth to ask where he was, then closed it again when he realized that several beings were already watching him with the patient curiosity one usually reserves for malfunctioning appliances. At the far end of the hall, the alien queen sat upon a structure that might have been a throne or might have been an advanced medical device designed to intimidate furniture. She looked human enough to unsettle him more than if she hadn't. Her face carried familiar lines of thought and fatigue, but her long ears swept back gracefully, catching the light and twitching with subtle, independent movements, as though they were listening to things the rest of her couldn't afford to hear. When she spoke, the sound arrived inside his head first, then politely followed through the air a moment later. "Either you marry me," she said, "or the war continues." He laughed, not because it was funny, but because his brain had clearly decided to protect itself by declaring bankruptcy on reality. The laugh echoed, bounced off invisible barriers, and came back sounding embarrassed. He waited for someone to clarify the joke. No one did. A small drone drifted past his shoulder and projected casualty numbers in several colors, all of them unpleasant. "I feel," he said carefully, "that we may have skipped a few conversational steps." The queen's ears angled forward, then flattened slightly. He later learned this meant irritation mixed with hope, but at the time it looked like a biological sigh. "We have exhausted all other steps," she replied. "You were selected because you are uninvolved, statistically insignificant, and emotionally unpredictable. Those are not the compliments you think they are," he said, and then, realizing he was talking back to someone who could end civilizations before breakfast, added, "With respect." The war had been going on for 37 standard cycles, which translated to a very long time or a deeply inconvenient one, depending on whose calendar you trusted. Fleets vanished between stars. Planets negotiated ceasefires that lasted exactly as long as it took someone to misinterpret a gesture. The Queen explained all this with the calm precision of someone reciting weather patterns, while his mind snagged on the word marry like a sock on a loose nail. "You understand," she said, "that our royal unions are binding at the quantum cultural level." "I understand some of those words," he said, "not in that order." She leaned forward and the hall adjusted itself, light dimming, sound narrowing, as if the architecture wanted to listen too. "The marriage creates a shared symbolic axis," she continued. "The war ends because it must. Our laws cannot contradict a bonded sovereign decision." "And you picked me," he said, glancing around. "A man whose most binding commitment is to a coffee brand." A flicker crossed her face, amusement perhaps or indigestion. Her ears twitched again. "You are from a species that romanticizes choice," she said. "You resist authority instinctively. If you agree, it will be believed." He tried to imagine explaining this to anyone he knew. He failed, spectacularly. "Do I get time to think?" he asked. "You have already taken too long," she said, then paused. "But yes, some time." The drones dimmed. The casualty numbers faded. For a moment the war felt very far away, like a noise from another apartment. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not a tyrant but a ruler pressed flat by necessity, carrying peace like an unpaid debt. "This is," he said, "the worst first date I've ever had." One of the attendants made a choking sound that might have been laughter. The Queen's ears lifted, just slightly. They gave him quarters that insisted on reconfiguring themselves every time he tried to sit down, as if the furniture believed discomfort was a necessary step toward enlightenment. He eventually gave up and stood in the middle of the room, arms crossed, staring at a wall that kept blooming into windows and then politely closing them again. Somewhere beyond that wall, starships were exploding with professional enthusiasm. Somewhere closer, an alien civilization had decided his romantic availability was a strategic resource. A soft tone vibrated through the air, followed by the Queen's voice. "You are pacing inefficiently." "I'm from Earth," he replied. "This is what we do instead of screaming." The wall folded inward and became an opening. She entered without ceremony, long ears angled backward, then forward again as if tasting the emotional temperature of the room. She did not bring guards. That alone made him more nervous than if she had arrived with an army. "You are permitted to ask questions," she said. "Great," he said. "Let's start with why me? There are billions of humans. Some of them are probably better at marriage. Or diplomacy, or both." "You were nearest," she said. "Also, your psychological profile indicates a high tolerance for absurdity." He considered that. "I once paid taxes while listening to motivational podcasts," he said. "So yes." She moved closer and the room adjusted again, gravity relaxing its earlier judgment. "Our previous candidates attempted negotiation," she said. "They demanded power, territory, immortality. You asked about dental coverage. I have priorities." Her ears twitched sharply, then settled. "Our species cannot lie easily," she continued. "The ears make deception unpleasant." She demonstrated by attempting a smile that did not quite commit. "Marriage to a human introduces uncertainty. Our enemies cannot predict it. Our laws cannot ignore it." "So I'm a chaos grenade," he said. "A stabilizing one," she corrected, "in theory." He laughed, then stopped when he realized she was entirely serious. "And what happens to me," he asked, "after I agree? Assuming I don't run screaming into space, which I assume you've planned for." "There are measures," she said, "gentle ones." "That's never comforting." They sat, finally, on surfaces that agreed to behave. Between them a holographic projection bloomed, showing lines of light twisting into familiar shapes, treaties, bloodlines, wars looping endlessly back on themselves. At the center, a blank space waited, patient and ominous. "That's where you go," he said. "That's where we go," she corrected, "together." He watched her ears as she spoke, the subtle movements he was beginning to recognize as strain. "You don't like this any more than I do," he said. "I dislike it profoundly," she replied. "But disliking things does not stop planets from burning." Silence settled, thick but not hostile. He broke it by asking, "Do alien queens date?" before proposing global peace marriages. She stared at him, then slowly one ear lifted higher than the other. "Is that a joke?" "Yes," he said, "but I can explain it with charts if necessary." A sound escaped her that might have been laughter, rough and unused. The room brightened, responding to something like relief. Outside, somewhere impossibly far away, a battle paused as fleets recalibrated, waiting for orders that did not come. "You are strange," she said. "You abducted me for political matrimony," he replied. "We all have flaws." She studied him, really studied him now, not as a solution but as a variable. "You have not agreed," she said. "I haven't refused either," he said. "Which, given the circumstances, feels heroic." Her ears angled forward, attentive, hopeful despite herself. "Then we will continue talking," she said. "Good," he replied. "Because if I'm going to accidentally end a war, I'd like to know who I'm doing it with." For the first time since he had arrived, the war felt less like a certainty and more like a very large problem that might, improbably, be talked into submission. By the time the war reached the palace walls, it was doing so mostly out of habit. Fleets maneuvered, weapons charged. Alarms repeated themselves with the weary insistence of bureaucracy that refused to accept change without proper paperwork. Inside the hall where decisions were supposed to be made, the human stood beside the queen, both of them staring at a projection that flickered between catastrophe and ceasefire, depending on which variable was nudged. "This is the part," he said, "where I'm supposed to say something inspiring, isn't it?" "Yes," she replied. Her long ears angled backward, betraying nerves she refused to name. "Preferably something that does not insult 3 civilizations at once." "No promises." The council had gathered reluctantly. Their presence felt more than seen. They expected a ritual, a binding, an ancient sequence of words that would lock the future into place. Instead, they got a human clearing his throat and asking for a glass of water, which arrived 3 seconds late and carbonated for reasons no one could explain. "I won't marry you," he said, and the silence that followed was so complete that even the war seemed to pause, embarrassed. Her ears snapped forward, then froze. Somewhere a fleet commander shouted an order that no longer applied. "Then the war," she began. "Ends anyway," he said quickly. "Because we're not following the script, we're rewriting it." Murmurs rippled. The projection wavered. He kept going, surprised to find that his voice didn't shake. "Your laws say a royal union creates peace because it represents shared choice, but forcing that choice breaks the meaning, so we choose differently. Publicly together." He turned to her. "You don't need a husband," he said. "You need consent that can't be faked, and I don't need to be a symbol. I need to be a person who decided to stay." Her ears trembled, a painful reaction he now recognized as the truth trying to escape too quickly. "If we do this," she said softly, "the council will resist. The enemy will test it." "Good," he said. "I'm excellent at disappointing expectations." They stepped forward as one. She spoke first, not in ritual language but in her own voice, admitting exhaustion, isolation, and fear. He followed, explaining that he had arrived insignificant and terrified, and somehow become responsible without being asked. And that responsibility, he'd learned, wasn't about sacrifice alone, but about refusing easy answers. The laws responded, slow and stubborn, but they responded. The blank space in the projection filled, not with a marriage bond, but with a new construct, one that linked systems through voluntary accord rather than bloodline. The war, deprived of its justification, unraveled. Orders conflicted. Weapons powered down. Somewhere far away, a soldier sat down and waited for instructions that never came. Later, much later, when the palace was quiet in a way that felt earned, they stood together on a balcony that did not judge posture. "You could have left," she said. "I know," he replied. "Turns out staying was scarier." Her ears lifted, relaxed now, free of constant strain. "What are you now?" she asked. "To my people." He smiled, a very complicated footnote. "And to yourself." He thought about